I absolutely think there's a chance the profession can go that way. What we're starting to see more and more of now is accountancy firms operating and structuring themselves more as a SaaS business than actually a typical traditional accountancy firm.
Either you craft an opportunity with these tools that suits you, or maybe you're going to get pushed in a direction by someone else that's driving their own agenda. Where is this all going? This week, I'm talking to Luke Farren, and we allow ourselves to explore where the future might go for the accounting profession. And we look at a few possible scenarios of how tech might continue to evolve and shape the behaviour of accountants and the profession as a whole. Really, really fascinating episode, this one. Can't wait to get into it. Here's Luke with a bit of his experience.
I have worked in the UK accounting space for the last 13 years or so. Kind of started my career originally at a small owner-managed practice at a time when cloud accounting really, so Xero and the like, were just coming onto the block. And I spent after that several years working in firms of varying kind of size and complexity, predominantly down in London. And towards the back end of that time, I became part of the founding team at a small boutique advisory called Acclivity. And Acclivity was ultimately acquired by Cooper Parry, who are a larger kind of top 20 national practice back in January 2023. And one of the main draws that Cooper Parry had to Acclivity was that business was set up quite leanly from a people perspective. So we didn't have particularly many people working in the organization for the size of revenue at least, but we did have a really well-oiled kind of quite autonomous technology stack that allowed us to deliver client work and kind of practice operations end to end without too much need for human kind of involvement and interaction. And I spent a couple of years at Cooper Parry post-transaction, but have left now to launch a new consultancy business called The Modern Firm. And for me, the reason behind that predominantly was to wanting to get back to working within the SME accounting community and specifically the owner-managed business end of the market to help other firm owners kind of overcome challenges around digital transformation, technology implementation, process optimization, which, for me are going to be super important for all firms that want to remain relevant, moving forward over the next couple of years and beyond. I think, the industry at the moment is at a super interesting juncture in terms of all of this stuff. And there are more firm owners than not that still kind of need to go on that journey themselves. And the more I can help kind of on that front, the better.
Super interesting what you said about Acclivity there and what made it attractive as an acquisition, that ratio between revenue and sort of heads and people. The fairly classic SaaS metric that you'd look at, is that typical of the influence you're seeing of SaaS businesses, or is that maybe a bit of an outlier?
I think that at the time it was a bit of an outlier. It's not to say that Acclivity was the only practice that were operating in that way. I can think of others that were doing similar types of models, but it was definitely at the time back in, as I say, 2022, 23, perhaps less common than it is 2 years later. And that kind of time frame in the grander scheme of things isn't that long. But I think what we're starting to see more and more of now is accountancy firms, certainly at the kind of more boutique niche end of the market, operating and structuring themselves more as a SaaS business than actually kind of a typical traditional accountancy firm. And I think there are lots of natural reasons that sit behind that, namely technology kind of now being at the core of how practices need to operate to deliver work efficiently and to kind of be relevant with their clients moving forward. But I think we're starting to see kind of that becoming more mainstream than perhaps we have historically.
I do find that to be one of the more interesting aspects of these big changes in technology is the way that it changes behaviour. Like, so for example, the other day I was in a little takeaway, pick a chippy up, and there was probably as many Deliveroo drivers and Just Eat drivers picking stuff up as there were actual people in there. And when you look at what's driven that behaviour, like if the iPhone wasn't invented, that wouldn't happen because you wouldn't have had Deliveroo as an app. Really, really interesting how these changes then make probably very unpredictable changes in behaviour as well. Are we seeing that in the accounting tech world, do you think? Are we seeing those changes in behaviour yet, or is that yet to manifest in your view?
I think we're absolutely starting to see those types of changes, although I think, the majority of firms that I kind of talk to or that I'm exposed to, whereas they've got the kind of appetite for all of this sort of change, they can't quite wrap their heads around the pace that all of this stuff is moving at. I mean, I've been talking to lots of different vendors recently, some very specifically around kind of how smaller accountancy practices in terms of its kind of delivery and back office operations could be run autonomously just with technology. The reality is I don't think the industry is at a point yet where it's prepared to kind of lean into that more mainstream. And I think there are plenty of firms that have got a long way to go in terms of their kind of change management journey to actually get their head around how that kind of practice of the future could look like. And so whereas I think, we are starting to see a shift in people's mindset and belief around how technology and AI and automation and all of those things is going to fundamentally change how the industry looks and feels, I still think there's quite a way to go before people can really get comfortable and on board with the fact that, a lot of what we know today is going to, be a very, very different kind of landscape and world to what it's going to be in the next couple of years' time.
So for the majority of firms then, say the average firm, high street practice, or, wherever they are at the moment, or on an industrial park just outside the town.
Yeah.
What do you think is the next hurdle for them? What are most firms typically facing at the moment?
For me, at the moment, so many practices need to get those kind of foundations fixed and those fundamentals sorted out around kind of having well-structured practice management data, kind of well-structured client data in a way that you can actually then leverage automation and AI and all of those things to its fullest potential. Because it's all very well and good getting excited about those technologies, getting excited about this piece of RPA tech, getting excited about this AI feature in this platform over here. And if you end up kind of, putting crap data into kind of an AI tool or a kind of, automation engine, then, a lot of the time that's going to result in things breaking and failing. And so I think the big challenge for most firms at the moment is actually getting a grip on that kind of like foundational data set in their practice to be able to really leverage what is coming next in terms of all of those advancements in tech.
I think it becomes increasingly difficult to make a case for not really embracing digital transformation in these tools, just because of the sort of pace of the tide that you'd have to swim against to say, no, actually, we want to stick with the old traditional routes. Like, do you think if you're sort of looking at it from the opposite side of what you're advocating for, is there a future for firms that want to stick to the old traditional routes? Is there a way for them to be successful, or is it hopeless?
It's a really interesting question, and I think you can break it down and answer it in a few different ways. I guess if I think about it, a lot of this stuff will end up being driven by kind of regulatory change that underpins it. And if we take things like, making tax digital and e-invoicing and all of that stuff that's on the horizon or kind of in train at the moment, then by definition, practices are going to have to start figuring out kind of how to deliver work more digitally to be able to remain compliant and to actually kind of, service, the regulatory requirements of their clients. And so I think, by definition, firms are going to have to things if they want to remain to exist, frankly, because if they, the alternative is to be, non-compliant. But I guess if you break it down in another way, I still think you're always going to have a firm requirement across practices to have really sort of value-led, relationship-driven kind of advisory type work. And arguably the way that that's always been done today in practices over the last decades, or last couple of decades and beyond, I don't think needs to change too materially for too many firms. So practices that kind of, enjoy, doing that kind of like people-led, relationship kind of led, advisory type work and stuff can absolutely continue to do all of that stuff and remain, if you like, stuck in the ways that they've been doing it in the future. But kind of how everything else kind of, works and operates in their practice. No, I don't think there's going to be much room to be operating kind of in a way that isn't kind of digitally enabled. Again, through regulatory kind of overhang, but also just through kind of, remaining competitive. Full stop.
So if we try and like get the crystal ball out and look forward to where things might be going, you mentioned a little bit ago about having this highly automated stack, and a lot of the work being done is automated, it's driven by tech. Do you see a scenario where a significant proportion of the accounting profession could come down to effectively a data warehouse that's driving a lot of the actual core work, and then you've got a front end of relationship management on top of that, which you would maybe bring in people that aren't necessarily qualified accountants, but you help them interpret and understand the numbers, maybe business coaches, business consultants, and then you have a range of those that then draw in from that data. Like, is there a chance a profession could go that way, or is that out of the question?
I absolutely think there's a chance the profession can go that way. And again, there are firms that I kind of know of who are already operating in that way. That is absolutely a model that I think will continue to evolve and become more mainstream. Kind of, it's becoming more democratized now in terms of the accessibility of some of that stuff. I think, if you talk about things like data warehouses and stuff, historically people would assume that you would have to have kind of very large internal kind of tech capabilities or external consulting capabilities to be able to design the architecture and kind of bring that stuff technologically online. But it's becoming easier and easier with the kind of tools and platforms that exist now to be able to do that stuff. And we're not quite at a point where that stuff's like no code, but we're getting towards a point where this is going to become much easier for all firms of all shapes and sizes to do. So I absolutely see a world in the next few years where that becomes more mainstream. And I think what we're going to see as well, in my opinion, is a blend then of not just kind of the advisors that you described, sort of plugging into that from an interface perspective and actually working with that data warehouse to kind of serve up financial information and data to clients. But we'll have a blend of those people sitting alongside like AI agents that can actually do that stuff as well, if not better than some of those people. And again, there's going to be limitations. They're not going to be able to, yet at least pick up the phone and go out for a beer with a client and actually kind of tease out some of the, more relationship-led stuff that I keep referencing will be super important in the future. But they're absolutely going to be able to do things like serve up kind of, requests around what's my UTR number and, tell me what my kind of payment on account for June next year is, etc. So I think, we absolutely see a world in which you've got that kind of advisory sort of layer, but also blended with AI agents and bots and stuff as well.
So if we think about, like you said, the biggest challenge a lot of firms face is data and managing that. And we imagine a possible future where it's very data driven. And then if you think from there about, well, what sort of businesses in our world are really data hungry and just want to absorb as much data, you come to the Amazons, the Googles, the Metas of the world. Do you think there's a scenario where some of those organizations could get into accounting, even purely just to get their hands on the data and sell more stuff, even if they don't charge for the accounting work? Is that ludicrous, or do you think that could be possible?
I don't think it's ludicrous. We did a talk, I say we, me and Daniel Lawrence from Bots for that at the Digital Accountancy Show this year, kind of around this type of topic. And we kind of tried to sort of like map out, what the future looks like from a it's definitely going to happen perspective through to a kind of like far-fetched, but this is possible type perspective. And kind of what sat somewhere in the middle of, those different discussion points were, a world in which kind of big tech, like, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, whoever, absolutely kind of have the ability to start overlaying kind of, plug and play services that can deliver accounting and stuff because of the, the data they've got exposure to, the kind of, the clients that they're already working with. And yeah, I don't think it becomes, as I say, too far-fetched to assume that could be a world in which we end up kind of moving towards. But again, it's not to say that that's going to be the right type of model for every client. In fact, far from it. I mean, look, maybe you've got some of your like e-commerce kind of like, Shopify type, people that are quite happy to have, a Google or whoever else sitting over the top of them and just doing their accounting autonomously for them because maybe they don't need or want anything else by way of tax advisory or kind of like, financial planning or anything else. But you're going to have tons of, I think, profiles of people that isn't particularly appropriate or applicable for, even if it is possible that big tech can solve it.
So we've gone through a couple of scenarios there of different things that may or may not happen, and it sounds like I'm starting to stretch that range of plausibility that you talked about in the discussion. What were some of the more quite likely things that you found or you've talked about in that section?
I think the more likely things are that, again, the use of kind of AI agents are going to end up becoming much more mainstream. I think as kind of agentic AI and stuff starts to become, a real world sort of capability that kind of firms can plug into and actually kind of, develop and design agents and bots that can actually start being deployed in replacement of people across both compliance and certain advisory type work streams. I think that will definitely become, a reality in the next 12 to 24 months. I think, some of the stuff we've already talked about around kind of how firms, by definition, are need to going to lean into technology more widely in like, platforms and systems to be able to deliver work versus kind of like other manual workarounds will absolutely be something that kind of falls into the future. We spent some time as well, which I think is relevant to all of this, around talking about how the people within the industry and qualifications and stuff more generally end up evolving. And I think my view quite strongly is that we're always going to have a need to have good people working in accountancy wherever they're based in the world. I think the accessibility of like global resourcing pools becomes more accessible because the quality and the reliability of that output is going to be able to be significantly higher than what it currently is because of tech. But also, I think from a kind of like UK or local market perspective, the people that continue to work in this industry, again, will always have a place doing kind of, roles. But the actual qualifications that sit behind the world of kind of accountancy, I think, are going to have to evolve, at pace in line with how technology is starting to dominate how work gets delivered. So, I don't think it's kind of unplausible to assume that the kind of qualifications that wrap around this industry will continue to kind of evolve.
I think your point around the AI bots, I completely agree. It feels like a really obvious use case that's kind of there now, and you can conceptualize that really easily. And it's difficult to see a scenario where people don't start using that, particularly for those frustrating questions, like you said, what's my UTR and where's my payment on account, and can you send me my accounts again, and all those annoying things. I just wonder if maybe there's an opportunity lost with some of that. I remember chatting to an accountant a little while ago, and they talked about the fact that it was just sometimes those little queries, those fairly innocuous things that just became a little thread that they could pull on and then found a bigger problem. So a client saying, when is my VAT due? Kind of, when asked about it, led to a cash flow problem that they were struggling with, that then he was able to help them with to, and offer a service to support that client. And I suppose if it's just an AI bot saying it's this date, there's a chance that some of those opportunities get missed, right? Potentially.
I think if we kind of go back to, I don't know, where are we? Maybe 5 or 10 years ago, perhaps 10 years ago, where if you wanted to, I don't know, renew your phone contract, you would have to kind of call up a call center for, Vodafone or O2 or whoever it is. It's quite a cumbersome way of being able to do what can now be done really kind of autonomously, using like a chat bot on your Vodafone app and stuff, where you can log in and kind of, via a couple of sort of like pre-programmed questions back and forth, get to the same outcome significantly quicker. From a user experience perspective, that's much more enjoyable than me calling up a call center to run through the same process. Has it resulted in Vodafone kind of like, selling less contracts and selling less mobile phones? My guess would be probably not. I think they continue to grow and scale as a business. And although this might be oversimplifying it slightly, maybe that's the type of approach and model that the accountancy industry or professional services more broadly might end up having to adopt. Or perhaps the other way to look at it, maybe because the accountants have got lots of spare time on their hands, theoretically, because they've got an AI agent serving up the more mundane, boring, monotonous kind of UTR sort of like payment on account type queries. Perhaps they've got the time to actually pick up a phone or get in a car and drive to a client and have those kind of conversations that would otherwise tease that stuff out, but more proactively versus reactively.
I guess it's also the balance of acceptable losses as well, right? And to your point around the Vodafone dynamic or other mobile providers are available.
Yeah.
But that will be a formula, right? It'll be like, okay, how many people do we have? How much do we have to spend on people driving these opportunities versus what do we get out of it? And is that acceptable or not? What's the opportunity cost?
Yeah.
And I think that question of saying, well, do we not ignore some client queries, but do we accept that we're not going to solve everything for every client based on a formula, and actually now we're more profitable because of it? Will that sit right with some accountants? Some accountants see themselves as a friend of their client and they've got to serve them and they're a pillar of the community, and that's all very well and good. But yeah, it's just interesting. I think they've struggled with that for a long time. You might tell me I'm completely wrong, but then it's just how does that dynamic, that culture, that approach work itself into a more data-driven, a more analytical way of looking at growing and driving a business, which seems to be where the force is directing them towards, right? This more SaaS-based idea of look at the metrics and just pick the thing that helps you scale and drive more growth more quickly.
I don't disagree with any of that in terms of how the industry has looked for that last kind of like, decade, 2 decades plus. And I don't see the theory behind that materially changing too much as we move into the immediate next kind of couple of years and beyond as well. I think that kind of, your accountant being that kind of trusted advisor, that kind of like public service type figure that kind of is there to, yes, get your numbers done for you at the year end, but also kind of support and advise on, business growth and whatever any other problem you've got in between as well. I feel that dynamic will continue to play a really important part. And again, I'll labour the point that I think accountants are going to have more time and more opportunity to do more of that kind of value add sort of like public service type stuff if they've got good technology driving the kind of boring, mundane stuff that they've perhaps been bogged down with for the last few years. But I think, and I think to your earlier point as well, like if you think about how all of this sort of world of professional services is evolving, I think that the accountant's role potentially becomes an even more interesting one that's also got exposure, be it in their existing firm or perhaps as part of a broader, more joined up network. They've got access to the right lawyers and IFAs and kind of mortgage brokers and whoever else that kind of makes professional services a more joined up kind of sort of feeling. And I think accountants that can kind of leverage their existing client bases and sort of work with their existing client bases to add even more value across those different areas end up becoming even more helpful than they have kind of historically. So weirdly, I don't personally think that dynamic changes too much, in my opinion. I just think that the ability to be able to kind of add value will become even more once they've got good technology driving, I guess, the rest of their practice.
So I guess like so many things with these changes, it comes down to intentionality, and either you craft an opportunity with these tools that suits you in the way that you want to work, or maybe you're going to get pushed in a direction by someone else that's driving their own agenda maybe.
Yeah, I think so. And look, I think ultimately as well, I think the value that an accountant can actually offer to their clients, I think is going to just continue to be kind of like, exponentially increased by advancements in tech, but also the advancements in professional services more generally. And I think that, for firms there to really kind of want to lean into that and actually embrace it, I think personally that's going to be, what continues to differentiate a really good accountant or advisor versus a kind of less proactive accountant and advisor.
Absolutely. Fantastic, Luke. That's great. Thank you so much, mate. Really, really appreciate your time for coming on and sharing your thoughts on this stuff. Just feels like a really fascinating point in time for this profession and everybody sort of surrounding it.
Awesome.
But if anybody wants to learn a little bit more about what you do or get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn kind of DMs, like email, luke@modernfirm.co.uk. I'm relatively kind of accessible, as I say, especially online and stuff. And look, I'm always interested in meeting people for a coffee or over a quick chat on Teams. So yeah, obviously more than happy to speak to anyone that fancies a conversation.
Sounds great. Thanks again, Luke.
Thanks, Luke. Cheers.